Welcome to Hidden History, Stories from the Secret City. I'm Keith McDaniel, along with my co-host, Ray Smith. Hello, Ray.
Oh, Keith, how are you doing today? It's this cold day.
It's cold, but I think it's going to get colder. So
I'm afraid it is too. That's what
absolutely,
I predict.
absolutely. So we don't have a special guest today. Um, you talked recently. We actually had to reschedule our guest today, and but we and I had talked earlier a few weeks ago about you had done a special presentation, and I said I think that would be a great thing for us to
Right.
have on Hidden History. So why don't you just kind of take it away?
All right. We'll put her on here. Hold on a minute. Let me get everything set up. Let's see if I can share my screen and sound and optimize for video. Bring it up
Right,
and
good.
tell me if you're seeing it all right.
Yeah, I'm seeing it just fine.
All right. Good
Uh,
deal.
while we're waiting here, I do want to mention, and you know this, that and I don't know that I've said anything about it on our podcast, but I thought I'd say it early on. You know, I did a lot for 9 years. I worked with the Center for Oak Ridge Oral History and did
Right.
a whole lot of oral histories, and now that project is not funded anymore like it was before.
Right.
And but I really enjoy that. I enjoy interviewing people and getting their stories on tape, and for posterity and for future
Right.
generations. So I'm offering that service to folks at what I think is a very reasonable cost. So if anybody's interested in, they've got a relative or a family member or a friend uh, that it's time to get their story on tape. They can just contact me, and
Yeah. Yeah.
we'll get that
I,
done.
Yeah, I appreciate you doing that. You did several hundred of them, and we've got them all online. Those oral histories are important, and
They are.
if you want to continue doing that, I'm sure there are people there that would be interested in doing it at a reasonable cost. And I do appreciate that you're doing some of the Scarborough 85.
I
Uh,
am.
they're getting on up in years now, and there's a real need to capture as many of those oral histories as possible. So I applaud you for doing that as well.
It's so funny. I contact one of the Scarborough 85, and to schedule an oral history. I got a little bit of funding, grant money to be able to do that, and I said, "Well, my name's Keith McDaniel." He says, "Your name sounds familiar to me." I said, "Well, I've been around a long time, and I've been doing this kind of work." And he said, "Aren't you the fellow that did the Clinton 12?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I am. I made that documentary. Gosh, it's been how many years ago now?
13, well, yeah,
No, more
2006,
than
wasn't it?
it was 2006. Yeah, so it's been it's 17 years since I made that film.
Time flies.
But anyway, but yeah, I just wanted to mention that before we get started today.
I appreciate it. And again, people just need to contact you directly and
Yeah,
find him on Facebook or
yeah, that's fine.
Keith's out there. You can find him.
You can
Okay.
you can find me. You can find me. And there may be some organizations, businesses that would want to support this kind of effort too. They can contact me, and we can talk about it. So because there may be some people that even though I'm trying to do it as cheaply as possible, it still costs a little bit of money, and
Right.
there's some people that we really need to do, but there are no funds available.
Yeah.
So anyway, all right. That's
Okay. Now, this is a presentation that I made about the history of women in the workplace during the Manhattan Project. I'm going to vary from that a little bit because there are some women that had an influence on nuclear things that either were before the Manhattan Project or after the Manhattan Project. And at the end, I'm going to bring them in.
okay.
When I did this presentation in front of the East Tennessee Economic Council, I knew that there'd be people in the audience that knew more about women working in these in the laboratory, ORNL and at Y12, or working with UCOR. There may be somebody that knew about someone that I didn't know about. So I intentionally allowed time at the end for the audience to contribute anyone that I had overlooked. And that's where I picked up a couple of them that I'll share with you near the end. But I'm proud of this presentation because it does not only point out some of the things that are often overlooked about the women in the workplace, but it also gives me a chance to really do an in-depth dive into Denise Kearnan's book, The Girls of Atomic City. And we'll use a good bit of that as we go through. I always introduce myself by talking about being born in Delina, a little crossroads community in Middle Tennessee. And I learned yesterday from an old friend of mine that we grew up together down there. He said he's tried to find that word Delina anywhere else, and he can't find another place in the world that's named Delina. And the reason it's named Delina was for a widow woman that was living there named Delina Marshall. And they called it Delina for her beautiful character and personality. Anyway, I wrote a history book about Delina. It's a bestseller. All 25 people that live there bought copies of it. So anyway, I married my high school sweetheart, Fanny. I'm a Vietnam veteran, been in Oak Ridge 53 years. I was the historian for Y12 until I retired in 2017. I've been the historian for the city of Oak Ridge since 2015. I'm a commissioner on the Tennessee Historical Commission, an elder emeritus at Highland View Church of Christ, and a chaplain emeritus for Oak Ridge. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about the Girls of Atomic City. This book that Denise wrote and published in 2013, she started about 3 years earlier than that and called me and said, Ray, I want to write a book about the women in Oak Ridge. And I said, okay, I'll help you. I'll introduce you to them. Well, I only had to introduce her to one. I introduced her to Colleen Black, and Colleen took over and introduced her to everybody else. She was a jewel, Colleen was. But this is where a lot of the women that we're going to talk about today are featured in this book, The Girls of Atomic City by Denise Kearnan. It was as high as 7th on the New York Times bestseller list. She did a nationwide book tour, published in a number of foreign languages, and she's doing a lot to, still is, by the way, even when she talks about her more recent books, this one will often come up because people have identified with it, especially if they're have any connection to Oak Ridge or any relatives in Oak Ridge. And in 2014, Mayor gave her a key to the city, and the East Tennessee Economic Council awarded her a muddy boot. So we appreciate what Denise has done for us. And of course, the focus is on the Calutron girls. Calutron just stands for California University Cyclotron. And this little lady here in the front is Gladys Owens. Gladys worked at Y12 for from January till August of 1945. And she was a Calutron girl working on these Calutrons. And I want you to focus just a minute on this man. That man back there is Connie Bolin. He was a supervisor. And I introduced him to Denise, and they had a wonderful time. He was already approaching 100 by then, but she really enjoyed meeting him, and he had a lot of stories to tell about working with these women.
Connie was one of the people that I interviewed for my first Secret City documentary.
Yeah, so, you're right. He was in that. I hadn't recalled that, but
yep.
He was a character, wasn't he?
He was.
Yeah, he was good. Sure. So anyway, when Denise came back in 2004, and Gladys came back in 2004, and saw this picture in the American Museum of Science and Energy. She told the director there, Steve Stowe, said, "That's me in that picture." He called me and said, "Ray, I found you a Calytron girl." Now, this is the first one that we identified, and they didn't call them Calytron girls back in the day. They called them cubicle operators. They treated these or called these panels cubicles, and the young ladies, they called them the cubicle operators. Oh, by the way, this lady sitting back here, the third one on that row, is Ruth Huddleston. She was the last Calytron girl that I've been able to take around and do presentations with. She just passed several months ago now, but she was a really good one too. But back to Gladys. Gladys said when I brought her out here and set her up on a stool at Y12, she said, "Ray, I never did know what I was doing when I was working out here. Can you show me?" And I said, "Yeah, Gladys, I can show you." So I opened up one of the panels. I said, "Gladys, when you were adjusting these knobs," and that's what they did for the full shift when they worked, was keep a certain meter on a certain point and adjust those knobs to make it stay there. I said, "When you were doing that, you were changing the value of a rheostat down here at the bottom." She reached over, tapped me on the arm. She said, "Ray, I still don't know what I was doing, but I know if I had any bobby pins in my hair, they'd just go stick to the wall somewhere." As you know, Keith, the magnets in those Calytrons at the time were the largest in the world, and they had everything in those buildings magnetized, but that had any metal in it, and they would pull metal bobby pins out of the women's hair. I'm gonna jump real quick to something that Katie Watt and Explore Oak Ridge is doing now. They're having these series. There's several of these short videos by Katie the Calytron Girl. And I want to show one here that talks about these Calytron girls. So let's watch her.
Well, hello again. It's Katie the Calytron Girl, and Oak Ridge, Tennessee has been my home since the 1940s. So much has changed now that we don't have to keep it zipped anymore. We're sharing our secrets with everybody. Well, it's now time for me to share one of my secrets with you. What exactly is a Calytron Girl? Time for a history lesson from yours truly. In 1932, Ernest Lawrence invented the Calytron machine in his lab at the University of California, Berkeley, to split uranium-235 from uranium-238. You see, Calytron stands for California University Cyclotron. Here at Y12 in Oak Ridge, we had 1,152 batch processes, Calytrons, that ran 24/7 for 2 years straight. Split between two different types of machines, alphas and betas, it took a workforce of over 22,000 people working around the clock here in Oak Ridge to do our small part to help win the war. That's where little old me comes in. You see, due to the war, there weren't enough men around to keep the Calytrons running. So the US government went out to local schools and recruited some hardworking, whip-smart young ladies who knew how to get a job done. Now what that job was, they couldn't tell us. What we did know is that we were helping lead our nation to victory and get life back to normal. We just had to take a few precautions along the way. Keep quiet about the work we were doing, and don't wear any metal. The wildest part is that when it was all said and done, this 2-year round-the-clock endeavor produced less than a gallon in volume of uranium-235, the necessary material to arm the little boy atomic bomb and end the war. Well, I loved pulling the curtain back and telling you a little bit about my life story. As always, you can learn about all the secrets of Oak Ridge by going to exploreoakridge.com. Until next time, it's Katie the California University Cyclotron Girl. Yeah, that's a mouthful. Katie the Calytron Girl, signing off.
Well, I think that little entertaining video is a good way to let people know what the Calytrons were and what they did. And Katie does a good job with that. There's several of those videos out there, but that was the one I wanted to share with us today. And women had many different jobs. You have to remember, a lot of the young men, in fact, all of them that could, were in the war, and there was a whole lot of effort going on across the nation in many different areas, and women were being used to fill the roles that normally would have been filled by men, but there wasn't enough men there to do it. So you might find them brazing or doing anything that needed to be done. They would take those jobs on. I mentioned Ruth Huddleston. This is Peggy Stewart and Ruth Huddleston. They were two of the Cayetron girls that I relied on a lot for a long while. When people would come down from DOE headquarters there for a little bit after Denise's book came out, they would want to meet a Cayetron girl. So I'd get a call to bring a Cayetron girl over to the New Hope Center so they could meet this undersecretary or administrator, whoever was coming. And I'd call one of them up and say, I need you to be over to the New Hope Center tomorrow. And I called Peggy one night and I said, Peggy, I need you to be at the New Hope Center in the morning at 9 o'clock. Now, you have to remember, these dignitaries didn't mean anything to these women. They were just other people. And she said, Ray, you don't understand. I don't get up till after 9 o'clock. But she was there every time I asked for it. She came. Peggy was a really neat lady. And she loved to hug people. She'd just hug everybody that she met. This is a time when at a Secret City festival, we had the Rosie the Riveter reenactors who came down and took part in the Secret City Festival. That's Peggy and Ruth, and this lady here is Virginia Coleman. Virginia Coleman was a chemist that worked at Y12, and she wasn't a Cayetron girl. She actually worked with the metal and with the uranium, so she knew enough about it to know they were working with uranium, but she didn't know that they were making a bomb. I mean, they just didn't have that much knowledge about it. Excuse me. So,
yeah, I actually interviewed, did oral history with Virginia at her home, and so yeah, she was an interesting lady.
She really was, and she got to know Denise Kiernan and Joe, her husband. They got to know each other so well that when Denise and Joe would come to Oak Ridge to do their research, they would stay in her home, and that really got to be a really good relationship with them. Back to Ruth and Peggy, this is a time when they met out at the New Hope Center and met with the Deputy Secretary of Energy. And this is one where we met with the Nuclear Security Administration administrator. And the interesting thing about this is Ruth and I had a routine that we would go through when we made presentations together. I would ask her, what did you think you were doing, Ruth? And she would say, I didn't know. We didn't know what we were doing. We just knew we were doing something to end the war. And then I would say, well, what did you think when you found out what you were doing? And she'd say, well, I was at work at Y12 when our supervisor told us that the bomb had been dropped on Hiroshima and that it was made out of the uranium that we'd been separating at Y12. She said, I was delighted because my boyfriend was in Germany and he had told me already that he was going to Japan. So I thought I saved his life, and I was really proud. And then she said, when I got home that night, I saw in the newspaper and heard on the radio about how many people we'd killed. And she said, I got so depressed, I couldn't sleep for a week. Now, when she said that, this administrator who was sitting right there beside her, I'm over on the other side of the administrator, she teared up. She leaned over and got real close to Ruth and said, Ruth, let me tell you why I understand how you felt. Let me tell you what my job is. And she went on to tell her that her job was to keep all of the nation's nuclear weapons so they would work, and to assure the president that if he ever needed to use them, that they would work, and that she hoped we would never, ever have to use them. that was a neat exchange to watch the two of them interact and to have that kind of connection. This lady here is Jane Greer. Jane came back to Oak Ridge and was there for a couple of times when we were having tours in through 97, building 9731 during Secret City festivals. She would set up down there and meet everyone that came through and tell them her story. She was a statistician, and she kept the calculations of all of the Calytron, the output, how much was getting, the uranium was getting out of the U-235 was being collected. And she said one time she was doing that, and she noticed this Army officer come up and looked over her shoulder, didn't have anything to say, just looked at what she was doing, and then went on. And later on, she saw a picture of General Groves and said, that's who that was looking over my shoulder. She went to the University of Tennessee in the 40s, early 40s, late 30s and early 40s, and she went over there and told them she wanted to be an engineer. And they told her that they would not let a woman go through an engineering curriculum and give them a degree, but they would let her take all of the courses she wanted, any courses, and they would give her a degree as a statistician. Now, that's what she did. She came and worked at Y12 and went on to have a very illustrious career in athletics, in administrating for athletics across the state. And then in 2010, the University of Tennessee wrote her up in their torchbearer, and Peyton Manning gave her an award for her career and recognized the fact that she was a graduate of the UT, but they wouldn't let her be an engineer at that time. It's an interesting story, but she was proud to get to have Peyton give her that award. And I talked about Denise, and of course here she is with Ed Westcott, the Manhattan Project photographer. Every time she'd come to Oak Ridge, she'd want me to take her up to Ed's house, and we'd go up and sit and talk with him. And of course, she was using a lot of his photographs. She also got to know Bill Wilcox and enjoyed interacting with Bill as well. Here's some of the ladies in a local book group, and that's Colleen Black in the very center there. She's the one that I introduced Denise to, and she took over. I didn't have to do anything else. There she is with Cindy Kelly and Denise, and that was at a premiere event for the National Park. This is a half of a book group, or actually a senior living center group that I spoke to about Denise's book. And Rosemary Lane was featured here in this group. Denise's book, this is a Polish translation. It got translated into a number of foreign languages. That's down at Books A Million in Oak Ridge when they were promoting her book as it first came out. That's Rosemary Lane. And Denise at the National Book Festival. This is, I don't know exactly what it is, but that's a young picture of a young Colleen Black on this Atomic City cocktail. You got no proof. This one is Ruth Carey, where we had Denise over at the East Tennessee History Center, had a reception for her over there. Colleen Black, Colleen and two or three others of these ladies would go down to, after the book came out, would go down to Panera Bread on Friday morning and take their pens with them. And people would bring those books by for them to sign. They did that for a year, I suppose. After
I remember seeing them down there one day. You know, Colleen was one of the first people that I went, speaking of, when I did Secret City, she was one of the first people that I interviewed for.
Is that right?
Out of about 100 people that I interviewed for that film series, she was one of the very first ones that I interviewed.
Yeah, she had a poem that she'd written about it that she'd read for anybody that would listen to it.
Yep.
She was a neat lady for sure. This is Celia Klemsky. She was General Groves' administrative assistant,
Yep.
and she's included in the book as well. And Helen Jernigan also was in the book and proud. When it came out in paperback, it jumped up to number 10 on the New York Times bestseller list during the first week. And I always like to share this with when I make presentations. I'm quoting Leslie Groves, so I can get by with saying this, but
Yeah.
he said, above all, I knew the labor supply of East Tennessee was of a very high order from the standpoint of willingness to work. I knew we had to use many female operators. Tennessee girls would be much more easily trained, would do better work than those of some other sections of the country. The principal reason for this was that the women here were not sophisticated. They hadn't been reared to believe they knew it all.
Oh, my
that,
goodness.
that always gets a laugh
Oh,
by the
sure.
women in the audiences when we make this presentation. This is a famous Ed Westcott photo of those women that were, he's had them walking out of the plant. He's in a back bed of a pickup truck and got his camera set up and pointed down, and that's pointing toward Alpha 1 and 2, I believe. And the two big buildings are 9201-1 and -2. And he was telling these ladies, now walk toward me, and notice this old man standing there like a knot on a log. He ain't walking. And when we remade this picture, we did it for to wrap up a documentary film we were making called the Atomic Family, or Nuclear Family, excuse me. And it's a history of Y-12, 4 30-minute episodes about the history of Y-12 we made for public television. And those are available, by the way, online at Y-12. If you just go to the Y-12 National Security Complex website, click on About, and then click on History, and go to the video gallery, you can get about 12 of those, including Keith's 2 documentaries about Oak Ridge, the Oak Ridge Story and the Oak Ridge Story from 1945 to 2006. They are all out there available for people to go and look. But when we made that documentary, we needed something to wrap it up. So we decided to redo that picture. And we did. We did it in front of the highly enriched uranium materials facility. And we had some of these people that are walking are descended from ones who were in that picture. And we put Ed in it. Yeah. And told him to just stand still. That's me walking behind him saying, Ed, don't move, don't move. Yeah. So we replicated that picture. Now, if I could do this, I think I can. Yeah, I'll go back to it. I want you to see that when we were doing the ribbon cutting for the New Hope Center and the Jack Case Center in 2007, I put this picture in the Oak Ridger in the newspaper, and I said, any of you ladies that are still living, come and be with us and help us, have lunch with us and help us cut the ribbons to these new buildings. Well, 5 of them contacted me. This lady here, Dorothy Coker, real short lady. And then this lady here in the polka dot dress. This one back here with the white collar. This lady with the black sash around her waist. And this one carrying the coats over her arm. This lady was Miss Atomic Bomb in 1945. But they came and helped us cut the ribbon for the new facilities in 2007. Now, Denise has come out with a new book. Denise lives in Asheville, North Carolina. Fanny and I went over when she launched her book, and the book that she came out with then was The Last Castle, which is the story of the Biltmore House and Gardens over in Asheville, North Carolina. And since then, she's come out with another book, We Gather Together. It's a book about Thanksgiving, and it tells the story of the lady, and I can't remember her name, I should have written it down, who actually created and promoted the idea of Thanksgiving, even got President Lincoln to declare it as a national holiday. So that's where our Thanksgiving came from. And I wish I had that lady's name, but I don't. But Denise has wrote that book, and she's also written others. She and Joe signing their lives away, about the people who signed the Declaration of Independence, signing their rights away, about the people who signed the Constitution, and then Stuff Every American Should Know, a neat set of little known facts that she and Joe have published together. And I talked about Ruth Huddleston, and I had her to do presentations with me all over. This is a Zoom presentation that we did with a lady out west. I forget in which city it was, in Nebraska, I believe, that she had a group of professionals on, and we did that. I'm not gonna run the video associated with this. We'll just post that, because I don't think that people would enjoy that so much.
I decided that I was going to work in the hosier mill a little while.
I'll let you hear her voice anyway. See if I can get by it now. Yeah. Now, this is a time when Denise was here in the American Museum of Science and Energy, and she had a group of the Calytron girls there, and did an interview with them. I'm not sure. Yeah, I want to move this up and just let you hear just a bit of it. I don't want to waste your time with me talking. Let's listen to a little bit of Peggy here, if I can get her to come up.
Forward toward the beginning of the war, do you guys have memories of Pearl Harbor?
Oh, I do.
You all do?
Oh,
Okay, why
yes.
don't we take turns? Why don't you, Hazel, what are your memories of Pearl Harbor?
Oh, that was one of the most devastating.
To be more of a presence in your lives at that point?
When you have a member of the family deceased in it, you think about it.
Mm-hmm. Did you
My
lose someone in
brother-
Pearl
my
Harbor?
brother- No, not in Pearl
Oh,
Harbor.
okay, okay. But you all,
That's enough of that. It lets people get the flavor. And that, again, those are all out on YouTube, and we can get to them if you just look on YouTube for Denise Kiernan, Oak Ridge, and Calytron Girls. Those things will come up, and you can watch more of them. This one is something that Gordon Fee turned me on to, the Women's Army, the WACS, and the Manhattan Project. I was not, well, I was aware that there was that situation, but when I found this article about this one particular woman, it gave me much more insight about the Women's Army Corps, a detachment that was established in 44, 74 women in the Manhattan Project. And they went through interviews, split between Oak Ridge and Los Alamos, and by the war's end, there were 422 of them serving with the Corps of Engineers in the Manhattan Project. And of course, this is an Ed Westcott picture of them, and the ones that were in Oak Ridge. And they required the utmost security because of the subject matter. They were stenographers, typists, clerks, telephone operators, handled records and reports, classified files. They were not used as engineers or scientists, although a few of them did work in these roles. Wilma Betty Gray is one that we're featuring here, enlisted in the Army in 44, and she'd studied at Kent State, and she came to Oak Ridge. And that's her picture, Wilma Betty Gray. And it was an adjustment to be in Oak Ridge. They lived in a dormitory, a bit dirty, a bit dusty, and a bit muddy. She worked as a general secretary for the Safety, Security, and Fire Prevention Office at K-25. And she was promoted to staff sergeant. She met her husband while in the Army, and participated in the Manhattan Project, and left it in August of 1946. This is the lady that wrote the article about her, Kim Guys. And I was proud that Gordon Fee gave this information to me to include in this presentation. And of course, you can't talk about anything nuclear or radioactive without thinking of Marie Curie. She discovered radium and radioactivity. She was awarded 2 Nobel Prizes, and her daughter also won a Nobel Prize. So she is very prominent in the history of radiation and radioactivity. This lady here, Lise Meitner, she is the one that defined what fission is, how that those uranium atoms are being split, and she's the one that provided that label. She was working with Otto Hahn, and in 1939, he went on to get a Nobel Prize, but left her off, and she did not get it. She was awarded a Fermi Award in 1966, and she has an element named for her, element 109. I just learned within the last few days that there may very well be a motion picture being made about her life.
Is that right?
Yeah, by the way, did you see how many awards, Golden Globe Awards, Oppenheimer, the movie Oppenheimer won?
Oh yeah, Oppenheimer. You know, they say the Golden Globes it can sometimes be a good indication of what the Oscar winners are going to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, Oppenheimer won Best Drama, and Cillian Murphy won Best Actor. Robert Downey Jr. won Best Supporting Actor in a drama, and there were some other awards. The score.
Of course, so Christopher got awarded for the best director, and even the person that produced the score, the music, won that award too. So Oppenheimer carried the Golden Globes. I mean, all the major awards.
That doesn't surprise me that more films about that era would be following on because of, that's what Hollywood does. They find something that works and they beat it
Absolutely.
to death. So hopefully, if there is a film about her, it will be a good one. So,
I hope so too. And I would wish that they would do a film on Nichols, but I guess it'll be hard for us to get that done.
Probably the portrayal of Nichols in Oppenheimer
That wasn't good.
Does not lead to a feature film about him.
No, that's the one criticism I have of the Oppenheimer movie is I don't think they did justice to Colonel Nichols or Major General Nichols by the time he retired. He actually ran the day-to-day activities of the Manhattan Project, had administrative responsibility for Los Alamos.
Yeah.
But he never had an office out there. In fact, he only went out there twice during the Manhattan Project. But I understand the freedoms that the directors need to take. I mean, that conversation that Nichols had with Oppenheimer took place. It comes right out of Kai Bird's book. I don't doubt it. But it didn't happen in Los Alamos. It happened in Chicago. Okay. But, he didn't want to build another Chicago set just for one conversation. But at any rate, I hope they do make a movie about Lise Meitner. I think she was an overlooked for her contribution, and I think it was significant. She understood what was happening when these other physicists didn't. They were just saying, we don't know what's going on. And she defined exactly what was happening, and she was right. And then this is a lady, Catherine Way. She's the one that suggested to William Pollard that the X-10 graphite reactor should be a national laboratory. That conversation took place over dinner, and he went on, as you know, to form 14 Southern universities into a consortium that applied the political pressure that got the Oak Ridge National Laboratory designated as a laboratory when it was the X-10 graphite reactor, and they were establishing national laboratories in large cities like New York City, Chicago, and out in California at Berkeley. But there wasn't much political interest in doing it down here in the rural South. So it was a major accomplishment, and all coming out of this idea by this lady, Catherine Way.
And it was a time where the Oak Ridge was kind of finding out what its future was going to be. And once it was designated a national laboratory, it kind of set it on set it on track for what its future would be and could
Yeah,
be.
it is. Yeah, the two things that happened after the war, one was the designation in March of 1948 of Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and then the other one was sending Jack Case out to Los Alamos to bring back the technology for converting that uranium powder that was being sent out there into metal so that it could be made into weapons parts. And of course, that became Y-12's major mission and
Yeah,
remains so today.
absolutely.
The Oak Ridge National Laboratory has grown tremendously into one of the premier laboratories in the Department of Energy system. The world's most powerful, fastest supercomputer, Frontier, the spallation neutron source, HIFER, and many other things. So, you know, almost everything you look into that has a technical or scientific relationship in any way to anything nuclear, you'll find Oak Ridge National Laboratory engaged in the research, even to the point of the discovery of the COVID vaccine. The computers at ORNL were used to help in that research. So it's amazing how many things, even to fusion energy. I mean, Oak Ridge National Laboratory is managing the ITER project in France.
Yeah.
So we just don't do well, in my opinion, letting people know just how important things that are happening in Oak Ridge really are.
But Ray, you know, and you're absolutely right. All those incredible things are done at the laboratory, but
Yeah.
let's not forget about the work that Y-12 does, and it's kind of unsung sometimes in the nuclear discussion. But the work that's done at Y-12 is vital for national security,
Yeah.
and it contributes greatly to you know the things that we're trying to do, and to the livelihood of this area.
Yeah, absolutely. There's 10,000 people going into Y-12 now.
Yeah.
I learned a few days ago, and that we provide the highly enriched uranium for the Navy's submarines and ships, and even working with the laboratory anywhere in the world where there's any highly enriched uranium that is in danger of falling into terrorist hands, they will go get it. The team from Y-12 and ORNL. I have to tell the story real quick. The first time we did that was in 1994. The man that had the responsibility for it came to me. I was managing the maintenance group at the time, and said, Ray, I can't tell you where I'm going, what I'm going to be doing, but I can tell you I'm taking a diesel generator with me, and these people that I'm taking with me, these scientists and engineers, don't have a clue how to keep a diesel running. If you would let me have a maintenance person, I'd like for them to go with me. I said, okay, I'll help you. And I called in one of the supervisors who worked for me, and I said, Mike, I can't tell you where you're going, what you're going to be doing, but I can tell you there'll be a diesel generator and they need you to maintain it. Can you go? He said, Ray, let me go talk to my wife. He came back the next day and said, Ray, she said I can go, but I'll only go on one condition. I said, what's that, Mike? He said, you buy me a horse trailer. I said, what in the world do you need with a horse trailer? He said, I'm going to pack up everything I think I'm going to need in that horse trailer, and I'm going to take it with me. I bought him a horse trailer. He put it on the C-5 airplane and flew it to Kazakhstan.
Is that right?
He did. And when they came back, the leader of the group told me, said, Ray, we wouldn't have made it without Mike. That diesel generator quit. And he got it going again. So that was our first effort to go and bring back highly enriched uranium from around the world. But Y-12 just continues to do amazing things. Even, I mean, you think about the spaceships that are out in outer space now. Where are they getting their power? It's from Oak Ridge. You know, it's the plutonium-238. It's amazing. I wouldn't stop and let you talk. What were you going to say?
That's okay. That's all right. Go ahead. Continue on.
All right. I don't know much about this lady except she was passed over for a Nobel Prize, has an asteroid named after her, but she was involved in the Manhattan Project as well. This is one of the most important women that had a part in the Manhattan Project. She was the youngest person and the only female was at critical pile number 1 up in Chicago when Fermi put that first nuclear reactor together. She was there. She also traveled out to Hanford, and she's the one that figured out what was happening when the reactors were getting poisoned and shut down just a little bit after they started. She's the one that determined what was poisoning the reaction and helped to solve that problem. So Leona Woods. And then I'm delighted to talk about this lady, Evelyn Watson. She was started out as a clerk typist at the Oak Ridge Associated Universities. Ultimately, she formed the Radiation Internal Dose Information Center that would provide the calculations for dose of radiation for people exposed anywhere in the world. And she's a good friend of ours, Fanny and me. Fanny worked for her for 15 years. And everything that they would do in the way of these accidents around the world, I mean, they wrote up about the radium dial workers and how they were touching their lips to the end of the paintbrush and got exposed there. They wrote all of that up. Fanny was the one that did the actual putting the words to paper or typing up what Evelyn would give her to do, and the others in the group. And you know that in 2020, Fanny and I got invited out to Vail, Colorado for a roundtable with a group of people that were just astounding folks. I mean, there are folks from all over the world that had done amazing things. And we were all brought there because of this one individual and his wife that just went around the country in retirement. And if they found something they thought was of interest, they would bring them to Vail, Colorado, all expenses paid, in the last week of February each year. And we got invited. And so we were going to go out there and make this presentation. And I talked to him. I said, look, I can make you a presentation about Oak Ridge. I don't mind at all. But I said, I've got Fanny here who can talk about radiation exposures around the world that she's typed up. And he said, well, let her talk. So we made a presentation for Fanny to do that. And don't you know she was the hit of the program?
Of course she was. Of course she was.
She was telling them things they'd never heard before.
I'm sure.
But Evelyn Watson was a jewel. She went on to be a scientist and to be recognized around the world for her contribution to internal dose. And then, of course, Keith, we can't talk about women without talking about Leanne Russell and, of course, her husband, Bill. They were the people that were hired to come and actually help to start the biology division at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, which was physically located at Y12. And I think it's best to just let you look at some of the videos that we produced about the biology division. I've got 2 of them here, and let's watch them.
From modest and humble beginnings to secret missions to being one of America's best resources for new technology, these valleys in East Tennessee have a rich and diverse history. We want to honor those who came before us. We want to keep our place in history alive by revealing the secrets of our hidden past. "1946. The Second World War had ended, a war that Y12 worked tirelessly to help end. In spite of its efforts to help win the war, Y12's whole existence was threatened. You see, the K-25 gaseous diffusion process had come to be regarded as more productive for enriching uranium, more productive than Y12's wartime calutrons. The once booming Y12 quickly went from over 22,000 employees down to less than 2,000, and many buildings were left vacant. Just over Chestnut Ridge, a sister facility was facing its own set of challenges after the war. X10 had just become a national lab, the Clinton National Laboratory, to be exact. and was well on its way to becoming the Oak Ridge National Laboratory that we know today. And then there was the fashioning of a whole new division, a division that would be focused on research and study the effects of radiation on living things, on organisms like fungi, plants, mammals, insects, a biology division. And for the director of this new division, the then Director of Research and Development at the Clinton Labs, Dr. Eugene Wigner, looked to the National Institute of Health.
They were trying to find somebody, and they asked some people at the National Institutes of Health about it, and nobody was interested, but Hollander was interested and came up with a program immediately about particularly genetic research, and sure enough, they funded it.
Turned out Dr. Alexander Hollander was the perfect choice. A German immigrant, he already knew a thing or two about radiation and living things. He'd been working on research of his own, studying the effects of ultraviolet radiation on living organisms. He was driven, focused, and a visionary. Hollander saw a facility that looked not just into the radiological effects on living things. He visualized a research facility for all things biological and biomedical that shared ideas and findings, a research facility that collaborated with other researchers around the world. But for a research facility of this size, well, X10 found himself in quite a quandary. There just wasn't any space available, or money for new construction. Money was tight following World War II for all government facilities, and so building a new building for a new division simply was not an option.
And they didn't have much room over here at ORNL, but they did have a lot of buildings over at Y12. And when the war effort winded down, those buildings were vacated. And so it made a perfect opportunity for a growing research division to expand into that area.
Buildings like 9207, 9208, 9210, and 9211 that were once used to prepare material for the Y12 calutrons were left vacant and were big enough to accommodate this new biological research division for the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. But of course, security was tight at Y12, and this posed a problem for the new division. But sensible German Hollander had a solution for that.
Alex was trying to negotiate for the use of a building. Finally, he yelled, "Well, why can't you build a fence around us?" That made it a done deal. He got that building and the adjacent one, both surrounded by a security fence.
But these buildings weren't intended for biological research, so some renovations were needed. But Hollander had already started assembling his team, so he found temporary labs for those researchers to begin work.
It was in a wing of the building that also housed the original X-Tank cafeteria. We only had just maybe 3 or 4 rooms, maybe more than that in the wing. And the end room became the mouse room. And all of it was a very temporary housing. We knew we were going to be moving, so it didn't much matter.
Slowly, as renovations were finished, each team of researchers would move into their new facilities.
The rest of the biology division moved before we did because their facilities were in a different building and they had been completed before ours. Our particular group moved in probably January of 1949. We moved into building 9210.
And so began the renowned Oak Ridge National Laboratory's Biology Division and the fantastic discoveries that would change the world of science and medicine forever. Research done here in the Bear Creek Valley at Y12.
Ray, you know, every time that I talk about, the work that's been done in Oak Ridge, is I give an example. I say, whenever they whenever you get an X-ray for a woman and they ask her if she might be pregnant, that is directly related to the work of Leanne Russell.
Absolutely. She's the one that established the 10-day rule to
Yep,
be sure that you don't inadvertently X-ray a fetus.
that's exactly right. So,
All right, let's look at one more about the biology division. It was the early 1950s. The nation was at rest following its greatest war. But in the quiet valleys of East Tennessee, a small group of scientists was beginning to cause quite a stir. The Oak Ridge National Laboratory was pioneering research on living things. Only this research wasn't happening at the lab itself. It was taking place on the other side of Chestnut Ridge at Y12. In buildings donated to the lab by Y12, the new biology division found a home. It was here at Y12 where some great scientific minds assembled that ORNL became a world leader in biological research. Some of the early breakthroughs came from the persistent efforts of a hard-working husband and wife team. Working in a building nicknamed the Mouse House, Doctors Bill and Leanne Russell were studying how radiation affects reproduction in mammals. While Bill studied these effects on reproductive cells, Leanne focused on the effects in the earliest stages of life.
I was getting involved in mapping out the developmental stages, embryonic developmental stages, at which you would get different types and different degrees and different frequencies of various malformations, like, legs and toes and ribs and all that kind of stuff. Making the correspondence between the timing of mouse embryos and human embryos, it turned out that some of the really hazardous stages were during a time when most women would not realize that they were pregnant. And so we made this recommendation that if radiation could be postponed, like if it was a diagnostic radiation, that it should be scheduled to the 2 weeks following menstrual period. So that became known as the 14-day rule. Some people call it the 10-day rule. And it was adopted fairly early, like in the 50s. And it's been internationally in use ever since then.
For the 50 years that followed, the 14-day rule has helped prevent millions of potential birth defects. The other Dr. Russell, Bill, is not here to tell us about his research, but his legacy lives on.
I think his very early work was wonderful, the one with the ovarian transplantation. But after he got here, I think finding the various conditions that changed mutation rates were what he considered most significant. Another very important one was a so-called dose rate effect, namely that if you spread out the dose instead of giving it all in one shot, that the mutation rate dropped to about 1/3.
This discovery led to the national and international standards for safe levels of radiation exposure for humans that we still use today. Now, during this time, another scientist was getting some notice, putting things on ice. Dr. Peter Mazur's specialty was cryobiology.
Cryobiology is the scientific study of the effect of cold on living organisms. People had attempted to freeze embryos and eggs, but had gotten absolutely nowhere. And so we were beginning to understand the factors under which cells were killed or not killed. So we took the knowledge we had and said, well, it seems to us that this is the way we ought to do it. Try it. And it was a pretty heady experience because we tried 2 experiments, and in those 2 experiments solved the problem basically in 10 days. And one of the tests of whether you successfully frozen embryos is to transfer them into a foster mother, a surrogate, and see if you get baby mice. And lo and behold, we got baby mice. And in fact, those baby mice appeared on the cover of Science magazine in October 1972.
In similar research, Mazur and his team successfully froze sperm that was later injected into a female mouse, and the pregnancy took. This technique was quickly adopted by the livestock industry.
In 2008, I think it was, the cattle industry froze 250 million doses of bull sperm, and those were used to inseminate 100 million cows over the world, and this resulted in a tremendous increase in the genetic productivity of cattle.
These discoveries create even more possibilities for the future, like preserving organs for transplant and preserving endangered animals. These are but a few of the snapshots of contributions made by ORNL's Biology Division, contributions that have left a long legacy made here at Y12. All right, as I said, and we'll wrap this up quickly, Keith. As I said, I asked them if they know other women that might fall in this category. The first one, Jim Campbell gave me this one. Dottie Silverman was assistant in the chemistry division in the lab, also was assigned to Waldo Kahn, also ran this Oak Ridge Civic Music Association, and she was the secretary of the Oak Ridge chapter of the Federation of Atomic Scientists, and her oral history is here. That, again, that's at the Oak Ridge Public Library's oral history program. And then this one is Doris Scott from 48 to 55. She was a nurse that was at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. She came to work at the lab, and there was a meningitis outbreak in the late 40s that hit Oak Ridge's Black community particularly hard. She worked with local agencies in the hospital and organized the local Citizens Health Committee that made up of the African-American cities, drew 1,500 participants. And in 1952, President Harriman Truman appointed her to serve on the industrial health section of the President's Committee for Health, just one of 10 professionals invited to join that panel.
Wow.
Yeah, and then Frances Pleasanton, she worked with Arthur Snell and the physicists at ORNL. They were working at the graphite reactor, pulling a stream of neutrons out of that reactor to do their research. And Snell describes two of the things that they did. She authored and co-authored a number of publications, and she was active in the local environmental causes in Oak Ridge. And then Libby Johnson was a physicist at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and she worked at the bulk shielding facility, and she helped to blaze trails for women. So there were several other women other than the ones that I included originally that got put into the presentation as a result of them helping me to think of who they were. So I really enjoyed pulling that together and making that presentation. I learned a lot as we did that. And there's some amazing women that were involved in Oak Ridge. I have an opportunity coming up the 25th of this month where I'll do a webinar with someone from Hanford, Washington, someone from Los Alamos, New Mexico, someone from out at Lawrence Livermore. We will all be doing a webinar, and there's already, and it's on women in the nuclear era.
Mhm.
And there are already over 200 people signed up for it. The last time we did one a few months ago, just on the history of the Manhattan Project, we had over 400 people sign up. So I'm looking forward to that on the 25th of this month.
All right. Well, very good. Well, thank you, Ray. Thank you for that in-depth and informative presentation. We appreciate that.
Yeah.
Who do we have coming up next?
We've got a unique opportunity coming up next. The lady that wrote the book, Abiding Appalachia, Mary Lou, at the time she wrote this book, she was going by Mary Lou Bonham Thompson. Now she is a well-known poet, and she's written this book, and it is, she uses the name Mary Lou Awikata, I believe. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but she's a Cherokee descent, and she's got just an excellent book in here that talks about her time in Oak Ridge and how she came to write the book Abiding Appalachia. And then this more recent book that she's written, we'll have her talk about those as well. I'm really looking forward to. She's an elderly lady, but she's just very, very interesting to talk to. So we'll have her on next time.
All right, sounds good. And folks, thanks for watching, and we'll be back in a couple more weeks with a new Hidden History.